Hi everyone and welcome to UI5ers Live. Today we have again two topics we want to share with you, and the first one is the so-called One Service project. This project aims to enhance the cloud experience of SAP UI5 Flexibility Key User Service. And yeah, we are happy to have Christian Voshage, the lead of this project, joining us today. Christian will take us on a deep dive into the project, sharing the concept behind the build once, run everywhere approach and the solution it provides to challenges associated with diverse data storage locations. So welcome back, Christian.
Thanks a lot.
And then moving on the second part of our session, we have a new tool to introduce to you, and this is the UI5 DTS Generator. This tool was recently published on NPM, and it generates TypeScript type definitions for UI5 controls. Yeah, and who better than Andreas Kunz to walk us through the tool's features and demonstrate how you can leverage it for your custom control developments. So also welcome, Andreas.
Hello, thank you.
And additionally, we have Stefan Beck and Peter Music with us to discuss these topics and also answer any further questions you might have. So hi, Stefan.
Hi.
And hello, Peter.
Hi.
And I'm Margot Wolny, your host for today's session. So without further ado, I now hand over to Christian to kickstart the discussion on the One Service project. Over to you, Christian.
Thanks, Margaret. So hello, my name is Christian Voshage, as was already mentioned, and I'm in the flexibility area within the UI5. And I don't want to repeat all the flexibility stories we had so many times here on UI5Con, on other parts, but flexibility is about adapting the UI, personalizing it as a key user, changing stuff, even if I'm not a if I'm not a developer. And all this comes with a very nasty question for us as a framework developer, and that is how actually to store it, and as well how to handle all the different stacks, because, well, you build a UI5 application. You don't build a UI5 application for ABAP. You don't build an UI5 application for the cloud whatsoever. You just want to build a UI5 application consuming backend services, as well as it should run everywhere. And you don't want to have 25 pipelines building all that stuff. So that is the big challenge, which thrills me in this department for years, and is still the main motivator for myself and the area to see that you, as a UI5 developer, build an application, you build it, and you're good with it, no matter where. That makes it hard for us, since there we say, okay, different backends have maybe different capabilities. Maybe you are even on a demo environment, or don't have any kind of backend which supports this. And we've actually started years ago in ABAP with one big monolithic approach, with even a framework for this framework, and then afterwards also built for the cloud. And when we built for the cloud, especially for the BTP Cloud Foundry environment, we figured out that such a monolith is cumbersome, expensive, annoying to develop and to debug, and also to configure. And therefore, we went with a microservice approach. We really built very small services, handling exactly what flexibility needs, what the client needs. And how we do it, that the client still understands it. Within UI5, in the bootstrap, you just specify one parameter, saying what kind of backend you have, and if you have a real backend with a REST endpoint, also which kind of root URL you are targeting. And then everything else is handled via the UI5 framework by detecting this. And whenever somebody says, please give me all the filters or give me all the adaptation of the application, it asks the right endpoints. On BTP, we actually went too far, because we built two microservices, one for personalization and one for the key user. And sadly, we somehow went on an architecture which also affects you as an application developer, where an application developer actually has to mention, I want to consume the personalization as well as the key user. And in the end, actually, as a developer, I want to have flex, or therefore it should be only one. We realized that, and therefore we changed there a little bit our setup internally. And some of you may know the UI5 for UI5 flexibility for key user service, which is here the discovery page, where this is really the service everybody out there can buy, can consume it, but personalization was not in it. It was next to it, and so it has to be combined. Therefore, it was a bit uncomfortable for a developer outside. Internally for us, we have to maintain two services. The data buckets are somehow different. Onboarding has to be done twice, for not only for the consumers, also for us. And therefore, we actually trained or developed our key user service to also consume personalization. Meaning now, the key user service itself can not only load the key user data, but also personalization. For naming reasons, price lists, and stuff like that, it's still named UI5 flexibility for key users, but now it also consumes personalization. So if we have an application and start it, I can make it a bit smaller. I have here 2 times the same application. And on the first tab, now it becomes very techy, when we start up the application, and I'm not timeouted, great, I have 2 requests for flex data. So this is really the client itself is configured in the index HTML that it loads the flexibility data, and in this index HTML, give me a second. No, it's okay. Sorry, it's a bootstrap. I have here a sandbox, which is very similar to an index HTML like you would do it. We have a parameter called flexibility services. And in the flexibility services, I actually questioned the key user connector with a flex key user endpoint and the personalization connector. And this results really in 2 requests. One is the key user and one is actually the personalization. So 2 requests on the line, 2 times configured, but even worse, as on the platform itself, I have to bind 2 services, I have to onboard 2 services, all that stuff done twice, which is a nightmare. You want to have it as smooth as possible. So therefore, we introduced the same logic with a different connector, just configuration that it distinguishes between only key user and personalization. And now with when we have in our sandbox, give me a second, I make it broader because, well, in the flexibility services, now we have the BTP service connector, which goes against, okay, now here it's the URL BTP, but it's actually the key user service behind it. And now with this, we ask the key user service not only for the key user data, but flex all. And then we also get the personalization in here. And for us internally, it was quite a challenge to do, because first of all, figuring out how to combine these 2 services, but even more how to also make the transition smooth. So like how actually can we now support others who already have the key user service to go with both, to have the transition. And the transition is the easiest part after a lot of work from the experts. It's actually that you only have to replace this string here, the string in the index HTML file, and you're done, because even the data is now already migrated on all data centers. All data centers have the data from the personalization service moved to the key user, and the perso is more or less a proxy calling now into the key user service database. Tricky part, challenging, some weekend work. Therefore, thanks to all the colleagues who participated. And now we are here that we actually load the data from one point. For all who consumes it, if you see the Discovery Center. There is also the initial setup link for the documentation. And if you see there, it is only mentioned now the BTP connector. So the same thing is also true for the UI5 demo kit, where within the bootstrapping itself, you only now see that there is the BTP service connector, but the key user connector is no longer supported, at least in the when you are in a standalone case. Big side remark, we are now in contact with the portal service, which is the predecessor from the work zone. And there it is still that the key user service only has to be used because the bootstrapping is in their hands and they have to adapt. But we talk to them and we hope that we also get there some solution. And in the end, here we are with tackling all this with, in the end, only providing active consumers a string change, and you're good to go. No data migration because it's already done. And for new ones, we halved their setup.
Having at the end a reduction of a complexity on a setup level and having only one service you need to configure, this is already a quite beneficial step. I can imagine that this was complicated. Also, the migration of the data is in that thing. Yeah. How much effort did you spend on that? So you said a few weekend projects, but I think it was a longer journey.
No, the weekend
all that together.
So the weekend project was actually only the part where we had to make the data migration, since we have quite a number of customers and end users, especially, who make use of filters and tables most of the time, which is the most prominent personalization aspect. And actually on all data centers, and we have there 2-digit numbers of data centers where our service runs on the BTP, for each and every, we had to migrate all the data, and in the end also see that in the end, before and after, all we have rough about the same number of entries. Would be a great solution, and it was. So we didn't have any problems, but it was a lot of preparation. How much time? I would rather say smaller number of months. Not the whole team worked on it, but we had some persons on it, and yeah, especially figuring out also these edge cases, like when I migrate, what's about GDPR, what is about instance-related stuff, like if I previously had a personalization instance and now a key user service instance, how to map these, stuff like that. So there is a lot of techie, fail and retry until we figured out how to do it.
Okay, but basically it's really like getting rid now of the 2 endpoints, configuring just this one, and everything continues to work. Or is that does both both things work kind of parallel right now, or?
Yes, it
for
does.
the time being, until is there a plan how long this will be like that, or is there kind of a phase out of the old services?
So it's very clear that the new service, so the new offering, first of all, is quite easy. Well, you only have one service and you have the same pricing for this service, meaning, well, you save already the perso. So it's also a question about pricing. But why the personalization was not externally available, but it is partially, you can consume it indirect. So therefore, it is now a question, do you really need it? And second, also, you remove the complexity. You don't have to do 2 things. It can't get out of sync. The request works or not, and all that stuff. Also, the client itself had to merge the responses together. Now you get everything from the back end. So there you have even a slight performance improvement because you have a prepared response. So there are a lot of small benefits in some. And when it comes to some kind of sunsetting, now we have to discuss with the new setup also how to improve on the pricing, as well as to go all to our stakeholders, especially the internal ones, discussing with them when do they want to migrate and what's hindering them, stuff like that. And then we would see. So nobody is left behind. No worries out there. We don't lose anything. And yeah, but the migration, as you see, is exchanging one string and then getting rid of some bindings. I saw harder transitions, which others were forced to put it mildly.
Thank you, Christian, for that part. Yeah, and
You're welcome.
with that, I think we can switch over to Andreas and the DTS generator. Andreas, are you ready already?
I think so. I hope so.
Good.
All right. So now we are going to talk about TypeScript. As you know, we recommend using TypeScript for UI5 applications now because it's much more efficient and more fun, and it's just simply better to use, more robust, and so on. And in order to enable application developers to write TypeScript, as UI5 is written in JavaScript and still is, and changing everything would take years, we generate type definitions that describe in TypeScript terms all the APIs of UI5, right? So this is an endeavor that we have started like 3-4 years ago. And last summer at UI5Con, we said, okay, now the type definitions are ready for release, so you can use them productively. And those type definitions, they are generated by a thing called DTS Generator because they are d.ts files, DTS Generator. And this is a tool that we have developed all those 3-4 years internally. There was one externally already at the UI5 TypeScript repository at github.com/SAP. But this was started by other people from another department, and they were not producing like the type definitions that we publish now. So we took this, developed it internally, and now finally, in the last couple of weeks, we published the new state finally to GitHub. So it was the old outdated stuff there. But when you now head over to packages, DTS generator, then this is really the current code that we are using to publish the UI5 type definitions that you can use. And the code is now also packaged and released on NPM. Version 3 means that's the new one that we are productively using. Version 2 was the outdated old one from a couple of years ago. But version 3 is now what we are directly consuming from NPM during our build to build the type definitions. And why is this important? So it's not important for every one of you because not everyone is creating UI5 libraries in JavaScript. So that's a sort of niche topic again, but still you can also get a glimpse behind the scenes if you are not doing that. So with the publishing of this package, everyone inside SAP and outside SAP who is creating UI5 controls and libraries in JavaScript can enable them for TypeScript consumption by creating those type definitions. And we've prepared also a short end-to-end sample demo tutorial how to do that. And this is what I want to walk you through today. So it's at this URL I had posted to the chat. If you're creating libraries in TypeScript already, that's perfect. There, the TypeScript compiler already creates the API type definitions. So this is not if you're developing in TypeScript. This is only if you develop in JavaScript, really. And this is why when I walk you through that end-to-end, I have to first create a JavaScript UI5 library. And if you don't have the easy UI5 generator, you have to do some preparation steps. But I already have that one. And so I can start right away with easy UI5 library, which creates a JavaScript library of UI5. So I just want any library with a sample control, so I just accept everything here. It's creating the files. There's, you see, an example renderer, an example control, and also an enum somewhere in the library.js. So that's what you get created as an initial starting point. It's created a new folder. And let's go into this folder and then open VS Code. Because we have then everything in one place, the terminal, the files, and so on. So you see this library contains, for example, an example control, which is called example. And as the tutorial now tells me, the things you then need to do is, of course, get the dependency to the DTS generator, the package that we are now newly releasing. So you can add it as a dev dependency. I have to tell you a tiny bit more about this generation. So from the UI5 libraries, the JSDoc of everything is parsed. And out of this, a so-called api.json file is created. So that's a big JSON file that contains all the APIs and all the documentation. And this is sort of intermediate format. And the UI5 tooling can already create this API JSON file. And of course, as this is a UI5 library, the UI5 tooling is already here a dependency, so it's available. And this intermediate format, this API JSON file, this is also used in the UI5 demo kit in the SDK documentation, where this is loaded and then shown nicely in the SDK documentation. And the DTS generator takes this API JSON as input and then generates the TypeScript stuff. So it's a two-stage approach. And this is exactly why we also need to do two generation steps to get finally the type definitions. But to create later on the type definitions of UI5, we also need the API JSON files of the SAP UI core, for example, for the dependent libraries, because in your library, you have probably a control, and the control inherits from the SAP UI core control. So we need the type information from the core library as well. And those API JSON files from the core, they are not available anywhere as an NPM package or so. So we have created a small UI5 download API JSON tool, which is part of the DTS generator. There you can say, well, I need for a SAP UI core and maybe other libraries, if you depend on inherit from SAP M button or so. I want to download the API JSON files for them for a specific version and want to put them somewhere. And I think, yeah, I've skipped step 2. Let's first build this API JSON file for our new library. As I just said, this is in the I'll increase.
While we build, Andreas, I think maybe also one thing what we can do is maybe this downloading, which is now a manual thing. We could maybe
this
also
is the next
consider
step where we have created a tool. Right. I will show this the next step. It's downloading.
Okay.
But as I said, the UI5 tooling can already create this API JSON file for your library. You just say what I just did. UI5 build JSDoc, and this JSDoc makes creating not JSDoc, but out of JSDoc creates this API JSON file. And this ends up automatically in the dist folder. And there you have to go to test resources design time. And there are actually two API JSON files, one in the API ref folder, but I think this is enriched with some additional stuff. You need the upper one, the one here in design time directly. Let's format this thing. And you see, this is the file that we are using in the UI5 demo kit for displaying the API documentation. And this is now generated for your library with an example control, for example, and all the methods, also the methods that are generated at runtime, like fire press, attach press for the press event. In the control, you remember, you just declare that we have a press event, but you don't need to implement the fire press and attach press and so on. So already on this API JSON level, all these methods are generated in addition. Okay, but as I just said, and as I think Peter wanted to ask, for creating the types, we also need the information, okay, this control inherits from somewhere written from the SAP UI core control. So we also need the API JSON file of the core, and this is not available as an NPM package or so anywhere. So it needs to be downloaded. And for that, we have added to the DTS generator a script that exposes this download API JSON binary. And this
I just was thinking of that we can really derive also this metadata from the existing project potentially, so that we don't need to explicitly specify what to download. It's just
you mean if
automate it a bit more.
The dependency to the core is already somewhere,
it's in the UI5 YAML, and here we know from the extents. I just it came up in my mind now when looking into that from that perspective. It could be simplified even, but we can follow up on that. That's now. I think there is always room for improvement.
Yeah, until then, you can use this tool to download the API JSON files. And as I said, target directory is temp dependency API JSON, and it's loading for just the core. Let's check whether we got it. The source, no, temp dependency API JSON, that's the directory. And there we have the API JSON file of the core, and it's a huge file because all the documentation of the UI5 core is inside, so it has like more than 100,000 lines. And yeah, some of your classes derive from that. So we need them. And there's a second thing we need, the UI5 type definitions. So because when we are creating with the DTS generator, your type definitions, we also automatically run a check. We could use the TypeScript compiler to check whether everything is all right. And this TypeScript compiler not only needs the types of your library, but also, again, the dependency libraries, like the types of the UI5 core, at least, because the base class API core control is in the core. So those type definitions are available, of course, on NPM. So you can simply install the UI5 types. The OpenUI5 types should be enough for that, because usually you don't derive your controls from some strange sub UI5 classes, so probably OpenUI5 is just enough. So we have your API JSON file with your new controls. We have the API JSON file of all your dependencies of the core, at least, and also the type definitions of the core. And that's all you need to finally invoke the DTS generator. And I'll show the call here. So that's the binary it exposes, the UI5 DTS generator. It should use your API JSON file as input in the dist folder. You remember, I just showed it. It should go to dist types DTS. It should use for the check the UI5 type definitions as like dependency packages. And the final thing, the API JSON of dependencies is in this temp dependency API JSON, which I've also just shown. So that's a couple of parameters, but it's not a thing you manually type all the time. This would be set up then in package JSON as a script or so, in case you ever need to update those. So let's go back, enter this slightly long line, and let the DTS generator run. And you see it's already running a test compile here. So the most of the time was actually the test and not the generation itself. And 0 errors, so we should have type definitions. The type definitions, we said they should go to dist types DTS, and here they are. So that's it. You have now generated type definitions. You can publish with your package. You can point with types in your package JSON to that.
To publish it with a package, it would also make sense in the package JSON to mention this the types as well.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
there's also this this
as
property.
types in the package JSON, you just refer to this file, and they are found automatically by TypeScript. You see now the enum, the example color from the library is there. Your example control is there. And there are also some special things that are not directly from your source code. For example, the $example settings, that's a generated type for all the properties, aggregations, events, and so on. You can just jump there. This is basically what you define in a control metadata. You say, well, I have a text property and a color property and an event named press. And this is what is then generated to this $example settings, because this is the object you can pass into the constructor. When you say new example or new example control, then this structure here defines what you can pass in. Of course, you can also add other control settings like the ID or stuff like that. Okay, so that's the full type definitions. Now you could use any TypeScript application, consume this library, and see that you have really code completion, type safety, and everything. You see the documentation in place. Actually, you can also do it in this project, which I would now prefer, because there everything is in one place. Because this project contains a test folder with a small test page. The test page just loads example.js, and example.js just creates one instance of this example control and puts it into the page. And of course, you don't have code completion or anything here. It's JavaScript, and you have not loaded any types and so on. But in VS Code, at least, the TypeScript compiler can also check JavaScript files. And this is what we can use here to get some type support, even in JavaScript, and also to check your type definitions right in place. One thing you need for that, to make the TypeScript compiler, so to say, work and find the types, is adding a tsconfig file. tsconfig.json, which you point to the UI5 types, the base types, and to your type definitions that we have just generated. And of course, no emit means it should not create transpiled output. So we don't need to transpile anything. It's just JavaScript. It should just run like in the code editor as a help for you. And of course, we need allow.js and check.js. So JavaScript is handled and checked. And we want to include all JavaScript files in the current directory, which is the example.js here. And in example.js, as soon as we have done this, TypeScript runs and says, well, this is what we want to have type and so on. Yeah, the problem is that the SAP UI define imports are not resolved to any types yet. So for the imports here, for the library and for the example control, you would need to define the types. And you can do this using JSDoc. In TypeScript, you would write something like example something. In JavaScript, you can use JSDoc. So this is a bit a strange way to write really the type that you import, but this is how you can assign the module, mylib library and mylib example to these variables that are coming in here. And with that, TypeScript knows what these things are. And when you go here, then you see, okay, you see the possible ways to invoke the constructor. The press event says event is fired when the user clicks the control. And this should be right exactly what you have written here. Event is fired when the user clicks the control. So the documentation from your JSDoc really ends up here for the application developer to help. And you get all the TypeScript features and everything, even in JavaScript here, but I would recommend never to start with JavaScript when you want to do that. But that, I think, closes the loop from creating a JavaScript library to having some application using the types that describe this library. And that's like the whole end-to-end flow that now everyone can do with their own libraries. And that's it. Are there questions?
I have one. Now that you already have as an intermediate step the api.json, do we offer also the index.html file that you can show it, that you already have the like you know the UI5 documentation, so I could also provide the same documentation, the same style, the same page for my own controls for other developers to use?
No, the demo kit, it's not yet possible to have the demo kit surfing the api.json from your project like we see it here. This is something which we could consider to make this possible, but it would be definitely work to do so. So this is really everything. What we see here is concretely hard-coded in the demo kit itself, and it would be required to be externalized. In the past, we had some HTML templates for visualizing the JSDoc, but this was a different concept at that point in time. So with the api.json as intermediate format, it's a different thing.
But I mean, you see, it's being loaded here. So this is really the base of what is displayed. I can't judge how much effort it would be to expose like this application in a way that you can load the api.json of your own library.
Let's see. So I think we can take that point. I think it's a fair statement because it was very often also requested on that part, yeah. And people really ask for that what is possible in the demo kit, that there is kind of a playground also available for the library development. And I think it's worth to think about that, yeah. But at the moment, we have to say it's unfortunately we don't have it yet. So
there's also a comment from Marco in the chat. What Peter mentioned, that getting rid of the intermediate step would be nice, less friction and so on. Yes, it's true. On the other hand, we always have to check where to invest our effort in. And I'm not sure how many JavaScript UI5 libraries exist out there, and whether this one line more would be like in total, how much time is spent with this line all over the world, and how much time should we invest in getting rid of it? We could do it for sure, but it's a very small round of people that are affected here by typing one line more. So We'll have to
Maybe
see.
we should validate how many people are affected.
Yeah, I
with
would say let's check how much effort it is. I don't see it's much
no,
effort.
first evaluate how many people are affected of this, and then evaluate how much, or the other way around.
Be much effort. Peter, I think we have another volunteer here.
I like this. Yeah, let's see. So lots of things
It
we have to discuss for the next
It
time.
inspired me definitely. So that was yeah, good to see that all. Cool.
Yeah, but saying this, thanks Christian for your demonstration. Great work there also.
Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, always, you know. And also thank you, Andreas. I think like the generator is really a cool tool, and I hope we get feedback on this. So use it and tell us what you think and if something is missing, like what we discussed. And with this, I think we can close for today and hope seeing you anyway in June at UI5 Flexibility. So saying bye.
Ciao.
Bye.